And hello again to those of you who came to the workshop before lunch. And thank you to Cecilia, what a wonderful presentation to follow. My name is Rachel Fox. I'm a PhD candidate in Communication Science Studies and Critical Gender Studies at the University of California, San Diego here in the US. And my talk today is titled, Why Debunking the Obesity Epidemic Won't Solve Weight Stigma. Apologies to those of you who did attend the workshop. This is going to have some repeat content. The goal of my work is to dismantle fat oppression in the US and globally. So this presentation comes from that effort, as well as my dissertation research, where I'm examining the ways in which stigma research and advocacy efforts often perpetuate the devaluation of fat people. So let's start with the story. And quick heads up for some obesity prevalence maps. So some of you may recognize these maps. I know they kind of ruined my life as a kid. They represent US obesity rates over time. And they were made in 1997 by the man on the right here, Bill Dietz. According to J. Eric Oliver in his book, Fat Politics, Bill Dietz played a major role in constructing obesity as an epidemic that spreads. In an interview with Oliver, Dietz said, "When we first began to use these maps in 1998, invariably the audience responded with a growing murmur, then a gasp as the increase in the prevalence unfolded. After people have seen the maps, we no longer have to discuss whether a problem with obesity exists. These maps have shifted the discussion from whether a problem exists to what we should do about the epidemic." In other words, this man is a major source of the stigma, denigration, and hatred fat people currently face. He deliberately helped turn us into a highly visible, threatening, high-priority national enemy. So what the heck is he doing here in 2022, tweeting about fighting weight stigma? These tweets read, "We must first recognize that weight stigma exists. Research shows the greatest sources of #weight stigma are people's families and healthcare providers. Negative outcomes can result, including patients avoiding appointments and potential treatments. The #obesity epidemic impacts us all. Become part of the solution with the help of our Understanding Obesity Guide. We provide key facts, background, and how to talk about #obesity without perpetuating #weight stigma." So for me, and I imagine for many of you as well, it's pretty disturbing to see a main architect of the war on obesity claiming to fight weight stigma. How did we get to this point where the fight against weight stigma is being co-opted by the people responsible for weight stigma? I argue that it is possible for people like Bill Dietz to claim to be fighting weight stigma because weight stigma has been constructed as a problem of knowledge about fat bodies, rather than a problem caused, at least in part, by the effort to get rid of fat people, or what I call obesity elimination efforts. As a result, anti-obesity actors and institutions have been able to co-opt the problem of weight stigma to expand obesity elimination efforts. We need a new way to talk about weight stigma that the people responsible for weight stigma cannot co-opt. So like I said, to date, weight stigma is considered a problem of inaccurate knowledge about the causes of weight gain, right? People blame obesity on a lack of individual willpower rather than the accurate biological or social structural causes. Inaccurate knowledge about the relationship between weight and health. People say that all fat people are unhealthy, blame fat people for being unhealthy. Or a problem of the inaccurate knowledge about the efficacy of weight loss efforts. People inaccurately assume that fat people can lose weight and view those who don't negatively. Now, to be clear, these claims aren't wrong, but they frame the problem of weight stigma very narrowly. When weight stigma is treated as a problem of knowledge, the way to fight it becomes to debunk inaccurate knowledge, change people's ideas of the causes of weight gain and the ease with which fat people can lose weight. But fat people face harms beyond just incorrect assumptions about our bodies. In 2009, Marilyn Wan argued that there is no nice, unstigmatizing way to wish that fat people did not exist. So what if we used this idea to ground our conception of weight stigma and where it comes from? When you focus on the stigma that emerges from the desire for fat people to not exist, a new structure comes into view. I call this structure the anti-obesity assemblage, and I argue that it is constituted by the attempts to produce a world without fat people. What the anti-obesity assemblage reveals is that if you just focus on one part of the problem, like knowledge, without focusing on the whole structure, then your liberation efforts aren't going to work. And here I'm going to switch terminology very deliberately from weight stigma to fat oppression, because I think fat oppression better captures what fat people are actually facing. So again, this is a repeat for those of you who are here, but the anti-obesity assemblage is a network comprised of anything that works to enable or enact obesity elimination, including standards, people, institutions, technologies, practices, representations, and discourses. And by enabling and enacting obesity elimination, I don't mean that it works. I don't mean that the anti-obesity assemblage is succeeding in getting rid of fat people from the world or even reducing the number of fat people from the world, but it is the network by which attempts to produce a fat-free world are made and justified. Anything that contributes to obesity elimination can be considered part of the anti-obesity assemblage. Obesity elimination is enabled and enacted in a lot of ways, and I'm just going to go over a few of them. So first, it is enabled by the transformation of fatness into obesity. Practices of quantification, like the BMI, and classification, like putting people into weight categories, make fat people legible as a pathological population worthy of targeting. And this is regardless of how accurate or inaccurate those quantification or classification practices are. Obesity elimination is enabled by the transformation of fat people into an eliminable threat, as in what Bill Dietz did, right? News about the obesity epidemic makes fat people very visible as threats to our own health, threats to our friends and family, threats to the nation, threats to the economy, et cetera. And then we are constantly bombarded with media that also shows how to, or at least how fat people are supposed to work to eliminate themselves, with shows like The Biggest Loser or My 600-Pound Life, or just Dr. Oz, right? This media is everywhere. And finally, obesity elimination is enabled by generating new knowledge about obesity. New research increases ongoing efforts to eliminate obesity, causal theories become more complex, which then calls for new solutions, which grows the network. And I can talk more about enacting obesity elimination in the Q&A. Obesity elimination is mostly enacted by fat people on ourselves, but the AOA helps that along by providing the means by which we can do that. So drugs and surgeries, but also things like Weight Watchers, Overeaters Anonymous, diet foods, weight loss gurus, Instagram ads, all of that. And then we know healthcare providers can also coerce or explicitly push fat people into weight loss by withholding other forms of medical care, as in the weight first treatment paradigm. Okay, so how do all of these things lead to fat oppression? Here, again, I'm not claiming that all fat oppression is caused by the anti-obesity assemblage, but rather that obesity elimination is a major cause of fat oppression. So enabling obesity elimination causes widespread devaluation and discrimination. Portrayal of fat people as a threat creates associations between fatness and moral badness, backwardsness, suffering. Additionally, anti-obesity media never portray fat people as flourishing or even having the possibility to flourish without weight loss, which diminishes many people's ability to imagine living a good life while fat, which then becomes a reason to enact obesity elimination on yourself, right? Because then you don't think that you can live a good life any other way. And again, obesity can become the defining characteristic of a fat person. And then on the enacting side, how does enacting obesity elimination oppress fat people? It causes widespread suffering, physical and mental. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the tolls that trying to lose weight takes. Hunger, chills, obsessive thoughts about food, exhaustion, lightheadedness, mood swings, in addition to the psychological burden of being told repeatedly that if we don't do that, we're going to die. And then most insidiously, This suffering from enacting obesity elimination is attributed to obesity itself, which then feeds back into the anti-obesity assemblage as a reason to put more resources towards obesity elimination. So that said, let's return to debunking, trying to fight the anti-obesity assemblage by just correcting knowledge. What does debunking obesity knowledge do in the context of the anti-obesity assemblage? It might not surprise you from my title. My research shows that efforts to debunk obesity knowledge are actually being used to expand the anti-obesity assemblage rather than challenging it. I'm going to go over two examples. One, the BMI. You may have seen these headlines. They've gotten very popular in recent years and in recent weeks. The BMI doesn't measure health at an individual level. The BMI comes from the racist project of quantifying bodies in search of normality. The BMI doesn't work for non-white populations, which those claims are all correct, but I want to really pay attention to their effects. In seeming response to these criticisms, 2 weeks ago, the American Medical Association released a statement saying that doctors should supplement BMI with other valid measures of risk, like visceral fat, waist circumference, and genetic or metabolic factors. From a structural perspective, it should be clear that this move is not challenging medical authority over fat bodies, nor is it dismantling the anti-obesity assemblage. It is doing the opposite. It's bringing more resources into the network of obesity elimination. And that is super clear when you look at the AMA's recommendations, right? In their statement, they say the AMA will also support further research on the application of the extended BMI percentiles and Z-scores and its association with other anthropometric measurements, risk factors, and health outcomes, and efforts to educate physicians on the issues with BMI and alternative measures for diagnosing obesity. So what this means is that the anti-obesity assemblage is going to get more resources for obesity elimination, right? This is going to be more anti-obesity research, more anti-obesity education, and it is definitely not ending the practice of obesity elimination in clinical encounters. Okay, another example. Many fat activists, myself included, have argued that diets fail 95% of the time, which again is correct. People who diet to lose weight gain the weight back through metabolic changes, etc., weight cycling. This 2016 New York Times piece by reporter Gina Collado was celebrated as evidence supporting this claim, right after the Biggest Loser, their bodies fought to regain the weight. So, the rates of dieting have kind of been debunked on a big scale. What has the anti-obesity assemblage done? Well, first, they've taken up that claim and reclassified obesity as a chronic, relapsing, progressive disease process. Right? This is a 2017 statement from the World Obesity Federation, where they say, sure, diets fail because of the nature of obesity as a disease. Dieting fails because we don't know how to stop disease relapse. And second, anti-obesity actors have engaged in boundary work to separate bad diets from good weight loss attempts. So I'm running out of time. I'm not going to go through this example fully, but this is basically the bad diets listed by Cardell et al. In the piece, Patient-Centered Care for Obesity, How Healthcare Providers Can Treat Obesity While Actively Addressing Weight Stigma and Eating Disorder Risk. So here they say, right, like people who undertake diets on their own, they're doing a bad job, that's why they gain the weight back. And here they say, here's how to do it right, by supervised evidence-based behavioral weight management. So this is another way that the anti-obesity assemblage has absorbed debunking efforts to strengthen itself, call for more resources, and to justify its own existence, right? We need more research to make sure people are going to diet the right way. Okay. I hope it's clear that debunking obesity science without calling for divestment from obesity elimination efforts is not going to get us to where we want to go, right? It can expand the anti-obesity assemblage, and a really important point I want to make, when anti-obesity actors respond to critiques, they increase their authority and their expertise because they seem responsive, willing to course correct, and that makes them more trustworthy. So debunking can have the opposite effect that we want it to have. And in addition, none of this is saying fat people are good, fat people are valuable, right? Debunking becomes a real distraction from valuing fat people and our lives. Calling experts wrong on their terms challenges them to fix a problem, not end their practices. It's time to tackle the whole problem. It's time for weight stigma researchers to start fighting the anti-obesity assemblage. Thank you so much.
Line? Nothing coming through. Anything in the room? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this and your other presentation. I'll come to 5 more and keep doing it. It's great.
Thank you.
The question I have that is certainly more complex than a couple minutes, but I work in healthcare education, and so my task is going to be to educate healthcare providers on how they can do a better job for all of us here. Mm-hmm. And so much of it's all about the health, right? So I guess what I'm wondering about is your thoughts on how we can start to have these conversations mm-hmm. in a way that resonates for people for whom health is the top of every priority list, mm-hmm. while not falling into these pitfalls. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, so I think implementing this in healthcare is a real challenge, and it's going to be really contextual. And I think the first thing I want to emphasize is like providing updated information about like the rates of weight loss failures, or I've done designing an intervention where we provide evidence of like, does weight loss counseling produce weight loss? No, it doesn't, right? So it's not that providing information or debunking is bad in and of itself, but you have to connect that to practices, to behaviors. So in this intervention I'm designing, we connect that to just like the idea of like deprioritize weight loss counseling. Just don't do it. You don't have to do it. It doesn't lead to the outcomes that you want. Don't do it. And so thinking structurally about obesity elimination efforts, what it means to resist those, again, it's going to vary from context to context, but it's a really good guide. It's like a really good first kind of directional step to figure out where to go. I know that might not be a very satisfying answer, but I would love to talk to you more about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're getting a lot of love online, but
thank you online.
No questions. Thanks very